Hey everyone, it's Professor Somo here. So today I'm going to present to you a little mini lecture to help highlight and elaborate on some of the main ideas from the very first chapter of Joel Best's Social Problems. This first chapter is on what we call the social problems process, and it helps lay the foundation for us on why this framework is so important for us to understand, especially if we truly intend to study social problems in the most all-encompassing way possible. The beauty of this framework is that once you understand it, you can really dig into practically any social problem and have a better understanding of it because of this framework. For this reason, it's also going to be very beneficial to you for the troubling condition, aka social problem, that you'll be choosing to work on all throughout the semester starting this week. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing I want to do is really talk about the two types of definitions, right, for social problems. One is the objectivist definition. So the objectivist definition generally views social problems as harmful conditions. So harmful conditions could be, things like crime, racism, sexism, etc. What they try to do generally is to measure or count, right, the characteristics of that harmful condition. And although at first that might sound like, oh yeah, that's a pretty good definition for social problems, if we dig in a little bit deeper, we see that this objectivist definition actually has some issues with it. One of which is that sometimes we worry about some conditions in which the measures or the count don't actually show that there is harm to actually that many people, which is really interesting because usually we only count something as a social problem when it affects a lot of people. If you think back to last week, for example, in our mini lecture there when we talked about C. Wright Mills and the sociological imagination, we talked about how there's personal troubles and then there's public issues, right? And in general, unless something is a public issue, we don't define it as a social problem. So there's that issue. The second issue is that sometimes we don't worry about actual other harmful conditions where the measures show that the harm is significant to a large number of people, and yet we don't actually define it as a social problem in our society. So one of those examples is, there's various types of discrimination out there, many of which we view widely as social problems, right? So things like racism or sexism would certainly count there, right? And yet, we know that height discrimination exists, as does weight discrimination. And yet we don't necessarily go around talking about those as these huge social problems. In fact, in many social problems textbooks, things like height and weight discrimination aren't even mentioned. And so there's that discrepancy as well. Another issue is that not everyone actually agrees why a condition is harmful. So in this case, even though we might agree that something is a social problem, we might think that it's a social problem for different reasons. We might disagree on what the actual reason is, what the harm is. So for example, with weightism, for example, some people might say that, we should really have fat acceptance in our society, and so weightism is a problem. Other people might see weightism as a problem too, but not for that reason. Instead, they might see it as an issue because, it's really unhealthy to be obese and et cetera, et cetera. As you can see, in this case, both of those groups are agreeing that something is a social problem, and yet they're disagreeing on why. And so, again, this definition is problematic when used on its own. So because this definition really varies from condition to condition, it's really, really hard to solely use this definition as our means for defining social problems. And so as a result, what I'd really like to do is to really point you to another way of defining social problems, which is what we call the constructionist definition, right? And sometimes we refer to it as the subjectivist definition or approach, which is really the same thing. And in this case, we're really viewing social problems as topics of concern, right? So things that people care about, which, as you'll see throughout kind of the semester, we'll be referring to topics of concern as troubling conditions. And so what this definition is really highlighting is, if we care about something, even a small subset of the population, if they care about something, we can't jump to calling it a social problem right away, but what we can call it is a troubling condition. And then from there, whether or not it gets dubbed a social problem is really up to a bunch of other factors, so to speak. And so in this case, conditions are viewed as problems not because of objective standards, such as like, a majority of people have this issue in their lives, but instead because people think they are problems. So what this definition is really saying is, if you think that something is a social problem, then it is one, just because of that. Not even looking at, numerical values and other types of metrics. So also then on the flip end, if people don't perceive a condition to be troublesome, even if we might objectively say that it is, then it's not going to be defined as a social problem. And so really what the focus is of this definition, this constructionist definition, is that what really matters is not just the quote-unquote objectivist viewpoint, but also people's response and their perceptions of these troubling conditions, which frankly is very, very subjective, right? And if we think about it, if we, look back into history, the reality is things that we consider social problems today might have not been social problems in the past, right? So things like sexism, for example, at some point wasn't really viewed to be the social problem that it is today. And so truly this constructivist definition, or constructionist, or subjectivist definition, is really almost allowing us to see just how flexible defining social problems can be, because of the fact that we know that people's opinions shift through time. Culture matters, right? Certain countries view things as social problems that other countries do not, for example, and that's very much centered on cultural differences. And so really what this definition focuses on is people's claims about conditions. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about what constructionism is, right? So constructionism is the ways in which people assign meaning to the world, right? And also it puts the focus on how language plays a key role in the construction process, because individuals learn about and typify their world through naming it and talking about it. So what I mean by that is our words are really social products. We create our words and we teach them to one another. And so in that sense, we really have power in what those words mean to all of us. What I'd like to do for a moment here is kind of pause and have us ask an inquiry question to ourselves, right? Which is, which of the three main sociological theories that we discussed last week does constructionism remind us of? And if I want to jog your memory for a moment and remind you that the three main sociological theories are structural functionalism, conflict theory, and symbolic interactionism. And so I want you to take a moment to think about, which theorist or which theory actually does constructionism remind us of? And then once you've chosen which of those theories it is, which of the theorists, so we discussed 8 of them last week, which of the theorists from those 8 fall under the theory that you chose? And to kind of jog your memory about, a little bit about those theorists. Okay, once you have sort of thought about that inquiry question, then let's move on. What I'd like to do now is to, dig into the social problems process a little bit more now that we recognize the difference between those definitions. So really the social problems process, which is, just another way to say constructionism, is a process that begins with the recognition that the only thing that social problems have in common is that some people have defined or constructed them in that way, right? It's this shared meaning that we're all creating together. Throughout this chapter and just throughout the book in general, there's at least 3 terms that we want to make sure that we understand, because they're going to be thrown around really, really often. So the first is a claim. So a claim is whenever a statement or action or nonverbal gesture is made that highlights a troubling condition. Claims making is when an individual or group says that a condition should be perceived as troubling. And then a claims maker or claims makers are people who feel that something is wrong and that something should be done about it, right? So generally, most claims makers tend to be activists, experts, and officials. And as you can see in that picture is an amazing sort of depiction of what social constructionism is, right? Which is really just a varying perspective. And so as you can see on this side is someone saying, oh, there's 4 of these on the floor, and someone else saying, no, 3. And really it's because they're looking at it from different vantage points. There's a natural history of a social problem. What that means is there's really a process that every single social problem goes through. And so generally what happens is every social problem goes through 6 stages, right? So what happens is that an individual or a group states, a claim that something is a troubling condition, and they do that in order to attract the attention of policymakers and the general public in hopes to make change, right? And from that point, right, there are 6 stages that a social problem must go through that I've depicted here, right? And the sequence of these stages is what we call the natural history of the social problem. So stage 1 is claims making. This is when people make claims that there is a problem, right? Stage 2 is media coverage. So this is a media report on claims makers. Stage 3 is the public reactions. So, this stage would focus a lot on public opinion and what does public opinion say about the social problem. Stage 4 is policy making. So this is lawmakers and others who address the problem. Stage 5 is social problems work. So this is, agencies that implement the new policies. And then stage 6 is on policy outcomes, which is the various responses to those new arrangements. And usually, stage 6 doesn't actually imply that a, social problem has been solved. It usually just indicates that it's at a new stage. And this is something that we'll explore much more throughout the semester. I want to take a moment too to kind of remind you of what we have going on sort of within the next week, right? So because we aren't meeting in class this week on Friday for 3 hours as we usually do, aside from watching this Prezi, what I'd like for you to do is to go to our Canvas page and look at the discussion forum that's posted under this module, right? Module 2, because we're in week 2. And what I'd like for you to do is to view that prompt, post your response to it, and then read what some of your peers in the class are saying, and then respond to a few of them. I would shoot for about 3 responses. I really want to make sure that you've, gone through the Prezi as well as completed the discussion activity by, Monday night at the very latest, although I recommend earlier than that. I would try to get it done, by the time that the weekend ends, if at all possible. And the reason why is because, your homework assignment number 1 is due on Wednesday, and the directions for that assignment are on Canvas. And essentially what that assignment is on is essentially the troubling condition that you're choosing, right? That assignment is on making sure that you've gone through the options for troubling conditions that's posted on Canvas, and then also access to the link that's on Canvas that has, all of the amazing table of contents actually on many social problems in order to help you sort of decide on the one that you want. Once you've decided, you send me a message on Canvas inbox. I let you know whether it's available or if another classmate has already claimed that topic. And then once you've received a response from me and you are clear, then you go ahead and complete homework assignment number 1, which is due Wednesday. And I want to quickly remind you that that's kind of going to be the pattern every single week. We're going to do an IRAT before class on Friday on a new chapter, come into class, talk about that chapter, do the TRAT, and then a homework assignment is always due every Wednesday. And so really we're looking at 2 out-of-class assignments every single week. All right, folks, I hope that this has been helpful. Thank you so much for staying tuned, and I look forward to our next session together. Okay, bye.